Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 179. And this episode, we are going on a bit of an adventure. We're going to be fighting the corporate structure. We're going to be hacking. We're also going to be going a little bit back. But honestly, I think it's best if we just go way forward.
Oh, God. Fucking Christ.
No, I went there. I'm going to do that. Now. We're getting it out of the way now because we're talking about Yars Rising, the recent release developed by WayForward in partnership with Atari, a sequel to a game series that started in 1982. And to help us in that conversation, we are joined by the director of that game from WayForward, James Montagna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
James, we're so excited. We have become best buddies with some folks over at Atari and been excited about Atari's shift into not only just publishing and resurrecting older games, but enhancing and encouraging new games. And Yars Rising, like Geoff said, is a brand new Metroidvania. It came out September of this year, made in partnership with WayForward. It is a 2D Metroidvania with hacking, and it takes place in this like cyberpunk future. And so I guess the first question I have is, how the hell did this happen? Like, where does Yars Rising come from? Is it a concept that WayForward pitches Atari? Is Atari looking for people to make it? Like, how does this narrative come to be and this project come together?
Yeah, that's the most common question I get because I don't think a Yars Revenge revival in this style was on anyone's bingo card. And That's actually, I think, one of the things that makes it so awesome to do something like this. But you asked the question of like how it got started. You know, it's not the first time that WayForward and Atari have worked together. Back during the Wii and Nintendo 3DS era, we did work on a game, Centipede Infestation. But since then, Atari's changed a lot. In fact, even the company leadership has changed, and many of the staff there are completely different than those days. And so it'd been a while since we worked together. And I think there's this mutual feeling of like just wanting to reconnect and see if there's some chemistry there and if there's something we could do. And immediately there was. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but Atari's had, I guess you could call it a shift recently. They're really kind of reinventing themselves over the past several years because their goal seems to be getting back in the conversation of modern gaming. You know, people think about Atari and they think about retro classic games, but Atari has some of the most classic intellectual properties in the entire game industry. These are these like very, very old, well-known brands. To just sit on them and let them be classic games only seems like a bit of a waste. I was immediately, once I learned that that was sort of like the company direction, on board with that. It makes a ton of sense. So personally, I totally get it and I think it's awesome. And when we got to talking with them, there's a lot of back and forth about what can we do together. We were talking to the CEO of the company, Wade Rosen, and there was a mutual feeling of like, well, we'd love to work with WayForward, and of course we want to work with Atari. So what should we make? There was a lot of discussion about various different IP. I think we even talked about stuff like a haunted house game. What would that be like? There's just several that we went back and forth on. I don't even know them all, but it was Yars Revenge that stuck out to us. And the business development head at WayForward, Adam Tierney, who also is a director at the company and worked on this game with me as well in a lot of ways, was the first person to kind of propose, what if we did something with Yars Revenge that kind of really turned it on its head? And he wrote this initial proposal document and came up with the concept of Emi Kimura, who is the protagonist of our game. It basically sort of snowballed from there. We were just like getting all these ideas for how to incorporate the original game, and it's the hacking sequence in the game since Emi is a hacker. So whenever you are hacking into a computer, you would play like the 1982 Yars Revenge style game. And the thought was that game already is kind of like a infiltration sort of game. It kind of is reminiscent of like a like really abstract form of hacking anyway. So that really kind of came together for us, and we put together this proposal, gave it to Atari, and I think there was this chemical reaction of like, wow, okay, we got WayForward, we got a cool concept, and we have a desire to build. We knew between the both of us, like, we have to make this game. That's kind of how we got the ball rolling. And if I remember correctly, it was greenlit pretty quickly, and we were just right off into development. I was tapped to helm the project and direct this thing, and immediately I was excited because I love lots of classic gaming IP. I love Atari brands. It just seemed immediately cool to me, and that's kind of how we got kicked off.
Yeah, I
love that.
Adam also wrote a comic prequel to the game itself. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a kind of a rare treat when we get to work on things outside of video games like merch or something as big and cool as a comic. And so since Adam was the writer on Yars Rising itself, it made perfect sense for him to also write this comic that we were in discussions about to kind of help expand the universe of Yars Rising and promote the game and just do something cool and make it so that we're not just focused on making a video game. We are sort of reinvigorating a brand. And the comic, I think, is part of that. So yeah, definitely look forward to reading the prequel comic. It sets up the story of Yars Rising. And if you've already cleared Yars Rising, it's awesome to kind of get this like additional background story. And if you're playing it for the first time, it's a really great setup and lead into it.
It's funny. So again, knew this was a WayForward game. Didn't really grok that it was a Metroidvania from the trailers. So like side-scrolling action, but like listeners know how much I love a Metroidvania. But then once I started playing this, and I mean this with all the love in the world, this was a WayForward game to me. As someone who's played every game in the Shantae series, played tons of other stuff that you guys have made. I mean, just from Emmy's dialogue, I went, oh yeah, okay. This is a WayForward game, and I'm so happy right now. The characterization of not just your games, but specifically this game and the way you guys write, your sense of humor, like it's on display from minute one, and I really love it. The strong characters, the use of hip language, which like technically 20 years from now. Also, much respect to picking a date like 2049 and sticking with it when we're already in 2024. Like I love when games do the future 20 years from now. That's my favorite bit.
Yeah.
So obviously the world came together as you were writing it, but like these characters are also strong and specific. No character that you speak to is just kind of one note. They all have personality, even like Yars characters that you rescue. Was that always the goal from the beginning? Because I mean, a lot of your games have really strong characters.
I don't know that it was like a very specific, rigid, spoken goal, but I think it incidentally sort of shook out that way because of the fact that working with Atari, they're awesome partners and they gave us a lot of freedom. And as a result of giving us that freedom, you get a very way forward game, as you kind of put it. And so I think that's sort of how that happened. There was a review that we read of this game that said something along the lines of Yars Rising is WayForward at its most indulgent. And we were very tickled by that. We thought that was like very fun, but also we kind of stopped and said, yeah, wait, that's true, isn't it? Because Atari afforded us this freedom, we just made the most like WayForward game. And that was actually what they wanted. When they came to us, they said, we want to work with you because we want a WayForward game. And it's like, well, that's all we know how to do. That's what we do best. You know, that was, I think, maybe what you're picking up on. And I'm glad you brought up the dialogue. People seem really torn on this. Characters like Kian with his like Zoomer speak. Some people take it like very face value and they're like, this game grown. Like, you know, they're just like rolling their eyes at it. Like it's meant to be that. But the funny thing about some of that dialogue is the notion, as you mentioned, it's the year 2049, which is like, within reason that we will collectively as a society make it to that year.
I hope so.
Gosh, yeah. Maybe knock on wood.
Right.
But the notion was that like a character like Kian having Zoomer speak in the year 2049 would seem like maybe he is like really refined in his way of speaking and he's a little old timey. And that was like kind of the actual like thought behind it. So instead of like today where he seems like he's trying to be like super hip and modern, the twist is kind of like in our minds, I don't even know if this comes across, but the twist is that he's like really like refined in his speak. It's definitely got WayForward DNA all over it, and that's just the way it is.
No, that of course. Whatever way it's interpreted, it is distinctive, and that is a choice. And it was very funny when I played through it on the Nintendo Switch, and the first few times I was playing it, I live in New York City, I was on the subway, I didn't have headphones. I wasn't hearing any of the voice performances, and so it was so funny that some of the dialogue, I'm like, okay, that's funny, yeah, that's very WayForward. Okay, that's getting a little self-aware, and then my partner encouraged me, no, you have to listen to it. The music's great, but you have to hear the performances. Jenny Yokobore, I believe, is the voice actor who's playing Emmy. And it's like, she gives such a great performance. And the second I started listening, it's like, she sells all of it.
Yeah.
And it's a credit to what a performance can be.
Right.
Speaking of how Atari gave you a lot of freedom to explore and make the game that you want to make, was there any sort of decision or thought on how kind of having the hacking mechanic and that challenge, which was pervasive throughout the game in a very nice way, be very true to Yars Revenge, or at least that style, while also bringing in other more Atari kind of games or any of those? Was that kind of a nice, like, so we're going to make a Yars game rather than try to, I don't know, fit what's going on there into like what people think a video game adaptation into a movie sort of thing is, or what reminds me of the PS1 era when Atari did a lot of their, you got Frogger, you got Breakout, you got Centipede, and they did them all as like modern 3D things. And I have all of them, and they are hit or miss. Was the choice to kind of keep that to the hacking something so that it could be refined, built, made modern while still true to it within this tapestry that you're making with the full game?
That's exactly right. From the outset, we knew that we wanted to incorporate the classic Yars Revenge game and just weave it into said tapestry. But I think as we were developing it, it actually did sort of take on a life of its own in some ways. So we knew what we wanted to do, but as we were developing it, we could see so many ways we could take this concept and add twists to it and make it something entirely new. And as we were kind of just stacking these concepts, we thought, okay, well, this is also a prime opportunity to hybridize and work in some other Atari games into the formula, as well as do things with the classic Yars Revenge formula that were never done before. The approach for us was, if you look at the original Atari Yars Revenge 1982 game, you just pop that into your Atari console and you've never played it before, you might be a little bit lost at first.
Yes.
It can be a very esoteric game. We thought, okay, if we deconstruct this game and take all the elements that make up the sequential gameplay of it and drip feed and teach it to players at the beginning of the game, without even realizing it, they'll learn the rules of how to play Yars Revenge. And so that was kind of our approach. Let's first teach players how to play Yars Revenge step by step, little tiny chunks of how you do it. Put it all together so that now they have an experience that is very true to Yars Revenge. And then just a little bit before we do that, start adding twists and adding different things that never existed in the classic Yars Revenge and start innovating on that core concept and just keep growing it from there so that by the time you get to the end of the game, we can give you Yars Revenge plus, where we just do all sorts of crazy things while still keeping it that sort of like bite-sized hacking experience.
And I can say empirically and anecdotally that was successful. We talked about this a little before we started recording, but after my partner Sarah had been playing through Yars Rising and was just about done with it and give me the copy to play, she picked up a copy of Yars Revenge for the 2600 because we've started collecting that in the past few years. We put it in to see if it works, and she didn't know what Yars Revenge was as gameplay. So when it started up and it was precisely the hacking mechanic, just early 1980s style, she knew exactly how to play the game. She knew to go to the Kotile, to get the energy from them, to bring it to the ion zone, to fire the cannon. All of these pieces that, as you pointed out, James, if you don't have an instruction manual and you start it up for the first time, Atari 2600 games, for those who have never played one in its original form, it doesn't have a title screen, it doesn't have an attract mode, it doesn't have a goddamned thing to teach you how to play the game other than your own failure. So for us to turn it on, her immediate excitement, and then she just starts rocking at this. Like, first time through, of course, adjustments for how the 2600 plays versus, modern gameplay, but gets through 3 or 4 rounds of it before she starts even beginning to have a problem. So I would say that is a successful utilization of it. It turns Yars Rising into a very interesting sort of game where, for me, yes, it is a Metroidvania, but because you have made this very cool thread of Yars Revenge, Yars Remix, as it were, throughout all of the hacking terminals, in my brain, it almost became this Metroidvania game that I'm playing is the coolest hub world for an arcade collection of Yars Revenge I've ever played. And the way that your power-ups and the things that are part and parcel of a Metroidvania, the upgrades, some of them are for the Metroidvania, some of them are for the hacking. Both are equally important. And I've completed the main story about a week or two ago, and I've now just been playing through the hack list where, again, for those listeners who have not played Yars Rising yet or haven't checked this out, as you beat those challenges throughout the game, they unlock on a separate menu, and you basically get what could have been released as its own thing of you're going to play Yars Revenge and then all these variations with a little bit of just maybe there's some missile command, maybe there's some centipede, maybe there's some other surprises in there. And you unlock further ones that aren't even in the main quest there as well. So yeah, it's a Metroidvania, and that's what you put on the magazine review. Do we even have print magazines anymore? But
barely.
But it is very interesting how, yeah, kind of James, what you and the team have created kind of just stretches in a couple of directions, and it's delightful how well it works.
Oh, I'm so glad it works. Yeah, it's kind of Trojan horse, the original Atari 2600 Yars Revenge game inside of this other game. And in a lot of ways, the core mechanic is playing multiple games at once. You're playing the exploration action with Emmy, and then you're playing this hacking game, and you sort of switch off between them, and they feed into each other back and forth in a lot of ways where you'll play them and you'll get the biohacks that you can equip, and then those biohacks will change your experience in the hacking. You'll also get biohacks that'll change your experience in the exploration gameplay, and so they're intertwined, but it is like juggling separate game experiences. And that was kind of the hope of what we wanted to bring to this kind of interesting mix of the classic style and the modern play.
Yeah. I was talking to Geoff about this. Like, if you've played an exploration action game before, a lot of the main stuff will be very familiar. A lot of it is stuff that's either similar to other games or it's its own take. The biohacks you get to like explore, like, running on water. Also, side note, the fact that Emmy narrates to herself and comments, like, not in every room. She doesn't talk all the time, but like we'll walk into a room and see water and then have a whole conversation about how she can't swim, which of course she can't swim. It's a platformer game, fall in the water, possibly drown. But like, I love that there's that narrative through line of her kind of reacting to the situation. If you're Samus, a lot of that shit isn't crazy because Samus is a bounty hunter who's been doing it for however many years she's been doing it. But if you're someone who just got the ability to fire blasts out of her hand, you'd be like, well, what the hell is going on? And I love that commentary. It's very much like video game fan gets superpowers kind of thing. And it's right, really silly and really clever. But I love the exploration. You allow people to customize, like you were talking about, the things that you can plug in to affect the different parts of the gameplay. There's no right answer. You can give yourself more health at the expense of not having enough room to give yourself more damage, vice versa. You could not worry about any of that and just see what song is playing in the top right-hand corner because you really want to know the music, which we're going to get to because I've been obsessed. Or you can like focus on the hacking gameplay and like you just want to get by on the action stuff, but you really want to make the hacking easier. Also, the accessibility option to make yourself invincible in the hacking mini games because you just want to play an action game. I love that. I think that's brilliant. I love accessibility options. And like the first time it suggested it to me after I died 10 times on one game, I went, oh, that's smart. Oh, and they say it's just for this one. And then you can turn it on permanently if you want. Great. I'm going to do that. I love when games offer that. I don't always want to be invulnerable because I wanted the challenge. But if I've died on the same minigame 13 times, maybe I'm not going to get it. Maybe I just want to move on. And like, I love that you guys gave that availability.
Of course, yeah. We want to make the game as accessible for as many players as possible. We do a little bit of R&D. We do a little bit of play testing. And we found there are some players that love the action platforming, but they're not particularly skilled at the kind of twitchy arcade gameplay of hacking. But we don't want to alienate those players. So we just offer different accessibility options, as we like to call it.
Yeah, I think it was really brilliant. And like to go back to the music, I will never, ever get Hacking My Brain by Megan McDuffie out of my head. Ever.
It hacked your brain.
It did. Like, whenever I have a quiet moment, I just go, like, it just pops back into my head. The soundtrack is so incredible. You have Mo Shop, you have Tommy Padiri. Talk about making a game like this. You know, some games like this would have just gone with some incredible scoring. You guys work with some legends in the video game music industry. You could have just scored it one way and that's it, but you have tons of pop and synth and other tracks in this too. Is that inspired by the game? Did you just want to try a different thing? Because it's very much electronic of the vibe of the world, and I think it's an incredible mix of music for a video game.
Oh, thank you so much for your kind words. I think for this game, at the outset, we knew that we wanted to make something really special with the universe. So the vibe and tone setting. I've said a couple of times that this game sort of is reinventing or doing its own variation of the cyberpunk subgenre, where you have a lot
Sure.
of games that have a cyberpunk feel, and maybe it's got this sort of like depressive, brutalist, sort of like dystopian vibe.
This is more cyber pop punk.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I should steal that.
Please
it really is. And so we wanted to kind of be a little bit more playful with our spin on cyberpunk. And part of the way we express that is through the dialogue and the environments, the character designs. But one really powerful way we can express that is the music. And so we have a lot of the core crew, like Tommy Pedrini, you mentioned, who worked on previous WayForward titles numerous times. He was working on Vitamin Connection, as well as Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. It was a lot of the crew from those games, Maddie Lim, Michaela Noctegal, coming back. And so in a lot of ways, this is a follow-up to the things we did on like the Vitamin Connection soundtrack in an interesting way. But we also knew that we wanted to make this be a special soundtrack because it is just such a special Atari IP, and we're inventing it and giving it this cool new vibe that if the music didn't match up with that cool vibe, it'd be like a bit of a waste. So I don't know that we intentionally set out to do this when we were first concepting what the music would be, but Yars Rising features the most ambitious WayForward game soundtrack of all time. We have more artists involved in the music of this game than any game we have ever done. And it's also an international collaboration where we have artists from North America, Australia, Japan, all coming together to just make this amazing soundtrack. It also explores musical genres that games typically don't explore. And that was on purpose. Sonically, I wanted Yars Rising to have its own identity in the landscape of gaming.
The music of your games have always standed out. You were mentioning Vitamin Connection. Of course, the Shantae games have incredible soundtracks, but like there was just something that felt so modern to this. And like, I don't mind just instrumental soundtracks. I in fact love them, but like something about having a song with lyrics while I'm running around shooting aliens. I joked about hacking my brain, but like that song is just becomes the kind of anthem of the game and is used so well in this that there are certain sections that you just kind of get a mix of songs. There's certain sections that have specific songs. It has a mixtape vibe, and a DJ and someone who loves mixtapes and love that kind of like turning the game sound off, listening to some other music while playing a game. Like when I used to play Overwatch all the time, I would like turn off the Overwatch sounds and play whatever soundtrack I wanted. Like it has that vibe, but built into the game. And I can't think of another game that's done it quite like this. And so I really dig it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Wow. Yeah. The influence for doing that was stuff like Jet Set Radio, where the music kind of like changes on you, and things like Katamari Damacy, which interestingly also has like the song changes. But like, I thought it would make sense if it was like a nonstop DJ set, because it's an action game. You don't want to lose the momentum. It took a lot of effort because it's a lot of different artists and international collaboration. Well, we have to get these artists that are completely different sides of the world to work together, and we have to make sure their tracks can all play into and blend into each other and mix into the next track. And it just kind of is a nonstop, endless DJ set where each area has not just a song, but an entire playlist of music. And so that was sort of the thinking behind it. And you mentioned it feeling modern. Definitely the vocal tracks, I think, help with that, feeling like a very like kind of contemporary game. The magnetic north that we had for this game is a term that I repeated to the music team just so many times, retro future. And so the thinking behind that was we are creating this, I guess you could call it like a vintage gaming brand, Yars Revenge. We're creating this revival of it. We are now in the future from when that was made, but we also want to honor the past. And also the game itself takes place in the future. And so it made sense to take this like retro future concept and apply it into the music in such a way that the music genres that we're tapping, things like Japanese city pop, where you have music from the 70s, the 80s, and you're taking that music and you're adapting it into just a contemporary sort of genre. And then you start getting things like future funk and new disco and vaporwave, and all these like kind of
I was,
contemporary
I was gonna
genres.
say a vaporwave too. You get a lot of those, yeah.
Yeah. So you picked up on that. It was intentional to kind of get this mix of retro and future and what those genres are and what that looks like. And these are like genres that are looking towards the past, but they're also very, I guess you could call them on trend. There's a lot of like people that are starting to listen to this music more and more. And so to position our game in that space and for the vibe we're going for, it just made a lot of sense. And hopefully it resonated. We also had the opportunity to work with just so many amazing artists. Like you mentioned earlier, Moe Shop. That was a really, really great collaboration that it was unprecedented for me personally, because every time I make a game, I'll pick 3 or 4, I would say, songs that are like the magnetic north of the vibe of the soundtrack of the game. This is the first time in my career that one of the artists that was part of our magnetic north actually ended up being one of the artists we worked with, and that was Moe's Shop. And so I was so delighted that could happen.
That's so cool.
I love that.
It's very cool too to think of, a lot of those sort of genres that are like the retro future, the look back to look forward kind of idea. Your city pops, those are late 70s, early 80s. And that's part of why they're ending up in a lot of more modern electronica, because, you always look back a generation, 2 generations to pull those things together. Whereas a lot of more throwback games now that kind of do the retro, they look to early 90s. You get a very Sega Genesis sound. You get an acid jazz. You get a electro swing kind of thing to it, which are a lot of fun. And I hear those influences as far as WayForward games and things like Shantae, or even in Mighty Switch Force sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I bring this up also because this also connects it well, I think, to Yars Revenge's point in time, because a lot of where those specific genres are looking are the early cassette tape days, are the latter days on some things. And so that is another weird, subtle way that it connects to its original time while making it modern and future. We were talking a little before we started recording about how there are references within this game. We were talking about one in particular that we won't spoil for people, that Matt and Sarah did not get. The joke was introduced early, and it pays off later. I caught it immediately, and all 3 of us had a fun time with it. With that, and with all of these sort of subtle points of weaving things together without necessarily waving a flag, was that a conscious effort in putting the game experience together to have those? They're not Easter eggs in the classic sense. It's not a go in this room and you see who created the game, to quote another Atari game, but to have that idea of, if you get the reference, you're going to love it. And if not, it's just a fun thing.
Exactly right. Yes. So it was intentional. And I'm really glad you picked up on the fact of like pulling from the era that Yars Revenge was made and bringing it into today, because that was a conscious effort. And it's sort of a low key sort of thing that even if you don't realize it, you subconsciously can feel it.
Yes.
Regarding the things that people might refer to as Easter eggs, it was never to hit people over the head with like, get the joke, you get it? It's a reference.
Yeah, you referenced Nolan Bushnell, but it's not a big deal.
Right. It was basically just our meticulous love and attention to detail being infused in this game, where we wanted to make this an Atari game in every way. It's a love letter to Atari. And so anytime there was a chance to make something be infused with Atari, we took that opportunity, whether it's like signs in the background, the names of enemies and characters, even elements of the music, the characters that are the boss battles, the hacking mini games, even the save terminals throughout the game. Anywhere we could add just a little bit of Atari flavor, we wanted to take that opportunity and not to be overt and have like Easter eggs here and there. And if people appreciate them, that's awesome. And if they don't know it, it's all good. It's just giving it Atari flavor. The intent was to just do it because it felt right, and it was never going out of our way to try and fit it in.
Very cool.
And you can feel it. Something I want to talk about before we move too far past it is the design of the game, especially the aesthetics. Again, in my very blunt way of saying a WayForward game, the design as well is that. I mean, I think about character designs all the way back to the sprite days of early Shantae games to like the flowy animated series style of the more modern Shantae games. You see that here, from the comic book design to the style of Emmy and the other characters. it's really incredible, not only the modeling in the gameplay, but then like when you get upgrades and then you get the close-ups of Emmy, the cutscene kind of comic book panels, like you have so many different versions of the different parts of the design of the game, but they all work really well and it really pops. I can tell that that cohesiveness is definitely very important to the team to make things feel a certain way and really stand out in that way that only a WayForward game can. Advance Wars Reboot Camp 1 and 2 also has a very kind of cartoony design in it. It just feels like there's this ethos of uniformity in the design to make these characters pop and stand out.
Yeah, we definitely have a certain way forward sensibility. And I think a lot of that is just kind of the homegrown sense that comes from our creative director, Matt Bozon. I've been at WayForward. I'm on my 18th year here. In that time, I've had the honor of working with Matt, the director of the Shantae games, on so many of those Shantae games, back to Risky's Revenge, Pirate's Curse, Half Genie Hero, Seven Sirens. Through that, I personally have like learned a lot of just that WayForward energy and how to represent that. Once you've been raised by that, you can't help but like fold that in. And so I hope you're kind of picking up on that. And it seems like a lot of players do. And that's sort of just the way it is for us when we're able to make something that has our own just vision applied to it. You're going to get those characters that have that way forward sense about them, the humor, the vibe, the cutscenes that you mentioned. That's like things we learned from River City Girls that informed the dynamic motion comic sequences of Yars Rising, right? So it's a culmination of everything we've learned from all the games that we've made so far, combined with that way forward sort of ethos that we're applying to this game. So if you played and enjoyed a Shantae game, I think you'll feel right at home on a game like Yars Rising. And same goes for if you enjoyed things like the humor or the visuals of River City Girls, this is the game for you.
Yeah.
I'd agree, yeah.
And I think the thing that I love about WayForward as a developer is not all your games look the same, but you look at them and get a vibe and go, oh, that's a WayForward game. And I love that. I mean, it's why I love so many other indie developers in the space. I think there's a power to that. Specifically, I want to talk about the designs of like acquiring the powers and stuff. That also feels like a throwback to me. It reminds me of like Mega Man and like classic Nintendo games where like you highlight the character, they get the ability, and then you explain what the ability does. I mean, half the time it's Emmy being confused and making fun of what the power-up could be, which is a great way to go about it. I really love that. I think that the thing that Yars Rising does really well, and I think it's kind of an ethos of everything we've talked about so far, is it's both modern and retro at the same time, but it's not just trying to throw it in your face like, here's nostalgia, enjoy it. It's like you said earlier, it's very much just at the core of the game, but still making it its own and kind of owning it.
Yeah, these are the games that we grew up playing, things like Mega Man. We look at those and those influence us. So it's the own way forward homegrown sensibility that's like built off of the games that we grew up playing. And you're going to get that classic gameplay sensibility because it's just what we love. We are all just gamers that have grown up with the world of gaming. And you feel it in what we make. So if it reminds you of a game like a Metroid or a Castlevania or just whatever, it's probably because we love those games and we're just applying what we know and love, and we want to share the things we know and love with players everywhere.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, most people who make games these days do it because they grew up playing games or they love games, and the joy of creation is the lens of interpretation. And so a game made by WayForward is going to feel like a WayForward game because of the people in it and the people that do it. And it's not copying Mega Man. That's a good idea. What does it look like when we do it? Well, speaking on that kind of thing, we definitely have a few questions for you about, sort of your gaming history. You've been with WayForward for a long time. You were working on other games with other companies, before you started working at WayForward. Do you remember sort of the video game that you played as a kid, or what period of time it was where you realized, wait, people make these things. I want to do that.
Yeah, I do. Kirby Superstar on the Super Nintendo.
Nice.
I played that game with my sister, and I had the opportunity to tell this to the director of that game, Masahiro Sakurai.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the things that created this meme of Masahiro Sakurai giving like a thumbs up, and you started seeing that everywhere.
Yeah.
So if you've ever seen that meme, it was a Smash Brothers roundtable where I like had the microphone. It was telling Sakurai this story, and that was his response was like a thumbs up, and he said "Ganbatte kudasai." But basically, the story is that my sister and I were playing Kirby Superstar together. And so I grew up playing these games. I played previous Kirby games, but that game with its co-op gameplay brought us closer together as siblings. And that was the moment that I think I realized I wanted to become a game designer myself, because I wanted to be able to provide what that game gave to me to other people. And so the Masahiro Sakurai, thumbs up, Ganbatte Kudasai. But that was the game for me. And I've been a lifelong Kirby fanatic since then. I like look around my desk in my bedroom. There's like Kirby toys everywhere because I love it.
Fantastic.
I mean, you're in good company here. We're very deeply Kirby lovers here too. I'm curious, do you remember the first console and video game you ever played and owned?
Yeah. I was in preschool. They had like a Nintendo Entertainment System set up there for like the kids to play on the break.
Aw.
And I was the little kid of the preschool. And so they figured like I wouldn't know how to play the game. And so they sat me with someone else that like had controller number 1 plugged in, and they're playing Super Mario Brothers. And I've got controller number 2. It's not plugged in, and they're like, he's not going to know any better. Sit James down at Nintendo. Like, let's see what happens. Like, he'll be entertained just watching. I was not a happy 4-year-old. I immediately knew something wasn't right. And the story goes, I don't even personally remember this, but the story goes, I complained and raised a big fuss, and they had to plug the controller in for me. And I guess I took to it like a duck to water, and immediately was like getting further than the quote unquote big kids that were playing the game. And Amazing. So that was like my start with gaming, Super Mario Brothers on the Nintendo Entertainment System. I immediately went home, told my parents that I wanted a Nintendo, and just I would not shut up about it. I think it was Christmas that year, 4 years old, I got my Nintendo Entertainment System, and my life was never the same. Before I had the Nintendo Entertainment System, I got home and I went to my crayons and I got a pad of paper and I started doodling what my video game was going to look like. I knew like right then, like, what if I made a video game? What would it be like? And that, I'd only just played a video game for the first time.
You didn't even have any at home, and you were hustling noobs and designing a game.
Yes.
Love it.
This is perfect. I love this.
This might be a repeat answer, but do you have a favorite video game of all time?
Oh gosh, that's so tough.
Or selection therein.
Or like a few games or seminal games.
That's such a difficult question. That's like, what's your favorite? I don't know. I can't like parse the question as logic. I'll try though.
Well, I can also put it like this. There's plenty of games that aren't necessarily like your favorite, but those ones that like, if you were to ask someone else like, hey, what's James' favorite games? Like, or what are the games you associate with him? Like, what are those games?
Well, they're going to say Kirby, of course, but
okay,
I happen to love Super Smash Brothers series. I think those are just phenomenal feats of game design. They're masterpieces. They're just so incredible. Just the attention to detail. I've learned so much from playing those games, and I think, again, Sakurai comes up. He's just an incredible game creator. I think one of the best in the business, if not the best.
Nice.
I'm also really a big fan of rhythm games. I love any sort of Bimani, Dance Dance Revolution, Beat Mania, poppin' music. I also like Space Channel 5 from Sega.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
Space Channel 5 Part 2 may be one of my favorite games of all time. I've played it so much. Rhythm Heaven series by Nintendo. My friends work on that one, and that one I've just been really just enamored with, and it's so inspiring. That's some of like my own gaming background. The games that if I'm going to relax and enjoy and play a game, rhythm games, and I guess Kirby and Smash Brothers and Nintendo stuff. I'm just a huge Nintendo lover, and we recently had the opportunity to work with them on Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, so that was like a dream come true. I mean, I was playing Advance Wars back in high school. It was like my go-to game on break, so we'd play with friends, we'd pass the GBA around. Those are kind of the things that I love, but I also would consider myself a bit of a gaming historian. So you name a game, I probably played it just because I just love to play anything I can get my hands on.
Amazing.
To that point, are there any games that are sort of like a white whale for you? Not necessarily if you need it in your collection, but you've wanted to actually play it and experience it, but you haven't had the opportunity to.
Good question. That's tough. I think I really get obsessive about setting out to play whatever it is that I want to play. But I have a bit of like, I feel like a blind spot on some classic like weird consoles. Like I think of the Apple Bandai Pippin console, which was like it's like a really like old game console that Apple like iPhone, like Apple computers Apple made with
Yeah, this is like
Bandai.
back in the mid-90s or something.
Yeah. There's some interesting games on that, including some things that were developed by Parappa the Rapper creator Masaru Matsuda. And so there's games on that console. I think one's called like Tuning Glue. I really want to play that, but I've never played that because I have not been able to track down a copy of the game and like a Pippin. But I will. That's on my like list of like weird things, obscure things to play. And then things like the Casio Loopy console where it had like a printer and you could like print stickers and stuff like that. I have not played that, but that is really inspiring and cool to me. I love the idea of like playing a video game and you get like an actual memento, like you get a thing you can keep, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So that's like the weird, obscure things that where my brain goes of like things I have not played, but really want to play. That's digging pretty deep, but I feel like anything else, I probably have played it somehow or own it in my collection.
I get that. I mean, why not dig deep? One of the big phrases for us for our show is every game is somebody's favorite. And so even the obscure stuff, there's somebody that grew up on the Apple Pippin somehow. And if you're listening and you still have that stuff, like if you need to get rid of it, just send it to the WayForward Studios. You now know where it needs to go. Like all questions answered. Let's make dreams come true here. And I mean, I share that I'm a collector. I fancy myself a bit of a historian, but you've got some resources I don't. That is incredible. Like, that level of depth is commendable and incredible. And again, just the same thing as like Advance Wars 1+2 or with Yars Rising or any of these, whatever other companies are putting out as far as games that are remembering the past. Just because we don't do something a certain way or a franchise isn't happening anymore, it doesn't mean it was wrong or it was bad. It just means we don't do it anymore. And then you go from there. So looking to history and reckoning it in the present is really can only help, I think, certainly as far as gaming goes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's just so much that we can feel inspired by that it's not the things that you would expect, like a Mega Man, just things off the beaten path. I love to play any game I can get my hands on because you never know what kind of quirky, obscure mechanic or something that might inspire what we make today.
Yeah.
It could be something I saw in like an obscure old MSX game, and I'm like, wow, that's a really cool thing. We should borrow this concept and transform it into something different. Inspiration can come from anywhere.
And it doesn't even have to be in the same genre either. My household is a big fan of pinball and breakout games, and we picked up a game called Sorcerer's Maze on the PS1 ages and ages ago.
Yeah.
And that was one that we generally, for our anniversary, will pick a game that we haven't played yet and just play it. Like, I got it for like $3 or $4. I'm like, this looks ridiculous. And so we started playing it, and it's one of my favorite breakout games now. And some of the things that they do as far as power-ups and alterations to the gameplay loop that you can do, I have never seen any other breakout game do, or even anything adjacent to it. And I hope one day somebody picks up that baton. So, absolutely.
That's so cool. You mentioned Sorcerer's Maze. That's like a really obscure one, but I actually grew up playing that one. So that's like, that's awesome.
I love that game. It is there's so many pieces of it that are just bananas broken. The story should not exist. The bosses look like they were pulled from DeviantArt. The cover of the game tells you absolutely nothing. It's my favorite game. That is my party game. I will show people that cover, pull it off of my shelf of games, go, don't look at the back. What kind of game is this?
Yeah, you'll never guess.
There's the chess master wizard on there, and the boy's wearing headphones, and I don't know, it's a dungeon crawler. Wrong.
Right. It could be anything.
Could be anything.
I got a copy of that game for free because my dad had a friend that worked at Sony, and basically they gave me like a couple of games that they might have been involved in or worked on. And that was like one of the games that I got for free and played the heck out of. So I have not heard it mentioned by another like human being in so many years.
I love that game. I'm so bad at it. I don't care. It's fun.
I would be remiss having a fellow Kirby superfan on here not asking this question. If you had to pick one Kirby power-up as your favorite, which would it be? Like for me, it's the obscure whip power that I think is only in a couple of the later handheld games. But I love he gets a little cowboy hat, some boots, and he has a whip. It's just the best. Do you have a favorite Kirby power-up?
Absolutely. I'm going to give you two answers because one's a weirdo answer. I really love in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror that they actually went all in on this very ambitious Smash power where Kirby
yes.
has like this Smash Brothers like up B and like down B, like sort of like down special like attacks. And it's just like, it feels like playing a little bit like Smash Brothers on the GBA. That was like such an ambitious thing, and they did it. That was so cool. But that's like not like a really common one. I really like the plasma ability because I really enjoy this concept of like dashing around to like build up this static energy around you. There's just something just so satisfying about the feel of like build up and then release. And I just love to just like dash around. It's like if you rub on the carpet and build up like static electricity and then shock somebody.
Zap somebody.
Yeah, it's like that sensation, but in the game. I love that. So that would be my other favorite.
And you would charge up normally as you run, except everybody charges up by just like mashing the directions. So you just like run around.
Exactly.
Yeah. I do want to point out to the listeners that ask you your favorite game. I don't know. Too many. Here's a list of 10. Favorite Kirby power-up? I have it already. Here's my prepared answer. This is the kind of friend that I want to make. So you're batting 1,000, James.
I love video games.
Excellent.
Yeah. I love video
We got to
games.
keep this going.
Video games are the best.
They truly are.
James, thank you for joining us. Before we wrap up, you have this storied history at WayForward. WayForward's partnered with Atari before. You've partnered with juggernauts like Nintendo.
Arc Systems Works. Yeah.
Systems Works.
Yeah, of course.
All these great other companies. And what do you see as like the future for WayForward? We know you guys have Shantae Advance coming out, which is a long time coming, a game that has existed in some form but never released, which is really exciting. What do you see next? Do you see any other Atari team-ups? Are there other companies you'd want to team up with? Like, I'm curious where WayForward is headed because you guys have such an eclectic history all the way back to the early stuff that you did in the 90s.
You know, it's hard to answer, and I don't want to give anything away too much, but I think the round of games that we are currently working on that are unannounced are some of the coolest, most exciting things. And so I think the future is definitely bright. We've got really cool stuff that I can't wait for the time when we can finally share it with you, whether it's in months or years. It's going to be so cool. There is a lot of really fun and interesting and different things that we're working on that I know people that enjoy WayForward games will appreciate. I guess if I had to say personally, what I'd like to see, I want us to keep doing games that embrace a level of quirkiness that set us apart as like a WayForward game, a game that only WayForward could make. I want to keep doing those and evolving that style of game. As well as, you know, I think a lot of people think of WayForward like, oh, they're, you know, and I'm very honored by this. Oh, they're good at pixel art. Oh, they're good at 2D, like side scrolling or action games or just sort of like 2D gameplay. But we do a lot of 3D gameplay as well. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily associate that with us. So I want to see us prove out that side so people know that like, hey, you know, we actually have like really great chops in this area too. So that's something I hope to be able to express before long as a company. I like to see us do that. And so I want us to do quirky games. I want us to do 3D games, and we've got exciting stuff already around the corner. And so I hope that answers the question.
Sure, of course. Whenever I ask a broad question like that, I never expect a straight, like, here's all the stuff we're making. Like, I know how this works, but like...
I've got an NDA, but you know what? I'm just having such a good time.
Right. But like I said it earlier, and I've said to Chris, who helped make this happen over on your team as well, like because of Geoff and Geoff lending me many years ago Half Genie Hero, which I played and finished, and then went out and I think at PAX East a couple of years ago bought literally every other Shantae game. And then when you guys did a reprint of the 3DS game, I bought that because I didn't have the 3DS version. I only have the digital version. Like, I own all of these games now, so I can't tell you enough how excited I am for Shantae Advance because also, I think it's a really cool opportunity for a game studio to go, hey, we wanted to make this thing and we couldn't, but now we can. And so we will, because many other studios who have that opportunity go, well, that's in the closet. We're just going to leave that. Let's make new things.
Or they don't get that opportunity to go back.
Yeah.
Right. It's really unusual to get that chance.
And what's fascinating to me also is like you get to take all the things you've learned over the last, for you specifically, the last 18 years you were there, and help put that into this game that wouldn't have existed in the same way if it came out all those years ago. I don't see a lot of other game studios doing things like that. And I think it's, again, part of this legend and incredible ethos that's, I think, a part of WayForward.
Yeah, you know, every game we make is built on the back of everything we've learned from every other game we've made. Like, I guess to kind of bring it back full circle into Yars Rising, the things that are special about Yars Rising, the attention to detail, even the things like the UI and the interface and the approaches to these little details, there's so many things that we've learned on previous titles, whether it's things that we do in our Shantae games, or most recently working with Nintendo, my gosh, on Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, we learned so much working from Nintendo that all those lessons, those little nuance and attention to detail in the Nintendo way of doing things, and becoming a Nintendo game director myself, all that knowledge is applied in Yars Rising. So Yars Rising wouldn't be what it is if it weren't for Nintendo, if it weren't for the Shantae games we made, if it weren't for things like Vitamin Connection. All of these things feed into and grow the things that we're able to create. So with that in mind, I think, again, the future is bright. I hope WayForward can keep making games that will delight and entertain people everywhere. And I hope players will really look forward to enjoying the games. And check out Yars Rising.
Yes. Yars Rising is literally on everything. You can't miss it. Every platform, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4 and 5, Windows, Xbox One, and Series X and S. It came out back in September, and literally just go play this game. Also, we didn't say this during the episode. If you've never played an action-adventure game, a Metroidvania, a search action game, whatever you want to call the genre, this is a great first one. I think it's probably one of the best first ones because it really does hold your hand in the beginning enough to get you going and then lets you free to do whatever you want. And I think it's really a great one of those too.
Yeah, it hits the points, but also the accessibility that we were talking about earlier does make it so that if you run into challenges, you can build accommodations for yourself so that you can see the story that you want to see. And it is absolutely a great jumping in point for the genre.
Oh, thank you. That's really awesome that you said that. That was definitely something that we hoped we could achieve with this game. People that don't necessarily play this type of game could pick it up and dig into it. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
James, thank you for joining us. This has been a pleasure, a dream, and a delight. Geoff and I are both big WayForward fans. You're never going to get rid of us now. We're just going to follow you around until the end of time. But let folks know where they can find you online, if they want to interact with you, where they can find, again, Yars Rising. We mentioned the platforms, any other stuff you want to plug, upcoming things, all of that good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, definitely follow WayForward on social media. It'd be at WayForward on Twitter, aka X. And you can also follow me personally at James Popstar, which is a Kirby reference.
Yeah.
And,
I get it now.
You got it. I'm also that on Instagram if you want to follow me there. I'd love to hear from anyone that's played a WayForward game and wants to say hello. Please reach out, tweet at me, DM, whatever. And WayForward.com, we're always kind of posting the latest, so you can keep up to date on whatever we've got going.
Amazing. Thank you so much again for joining us. This was such an absolute pleasure. We're looking forward to talk more video games. And obviously, we have to have you come back on to talk about Kirby at some point, obviously, because like
anytime.
It's
been at least 2 or 3 years since we've talked about Kirby in any great detail. We got to do it again.
Yeah, we're overdue. And no better person now, we've learned.
You let me know and I'm in.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Well, at this point, listeners, we put it to you. Have any of you played Yars Rising? Have you played Yars Revenge and wondering about this newfangled Yars game that's coming out? I think we actually talked to someone on the Discord that kind of had that sort of feeling about things. So I was talking about Yars Revenge because I'd gotten the game and then went, oh, I think they meant Yars Rising. Nope, they meant Yars Revenge. Okay, cool. So are you somebody that's also like that? Please let us know. Do you want to know about other games that WayForward has been playing? Did we completely miss other great games within WayForward's oeuvre and portfolio? Because there's a ton of them that we should be playing that we haven't mentioned before. Any and all of this, please let us know. Reach out to us. Get in contact. There's so many great ways to reach out to us. We are Fun and Games Pod across all social media platforms that we are currently active on, which as of this episode is Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. If you are interested in doing a side quest episode and talking about a game you love and why you love it, you can also email us and talk to us there about it. If the game hasn't been covered, you could be the one to cover it. You could also, if you want to continue the conversation, visit certainpov.com and find not only other fantastic podcasts on our network, but a permanent invite link to our Discord server, where a lot of these conversations continue and some of the topics for discussion episodes come up from. You can also, if you want to support us in a way that helps us, get to conventions and get better equipment for recording things, if you listen to our PAX West episode and the interview sounded better, Thank you to our patrons on Patreon. You can visit patreon.com/funandgamespod. There is a free tier, so you don't have to give any money if you do not have the means or wish to, but you want a one-stop spot for everything that Matt and I are working on. That's a great place to do it. But we do want to give a shout out to everybody on the high scoreboard tier and above. Today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Roger Reichart, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Robert Prine, Sean Bowen, and Wes Bates. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. The letters cannot be entered while you are in the Ion Zone.
Also, of course, if you want to help us without any monetary value, the best way to do that is go to your podcast platform of choice. Yes, the one you are currently listening to us on right now, and rate and review us. So many different platforms allow ratings and reviews, and that's really the best way to absolutely help this podcast. Also, that way, when someone searches in the podcast app, Three Dorks Talking About Kirby, this episode will come up. It'll get pushed to the top because you'll have rated and reviewed us. And honestly, we can't ask for anything more.
Or looking up Yars Rising, because I think more people should be talking about this game. Look, I know that when I started covering video games, I wouldn't be able to look up walkthroughs as soon as the game came out or before the embargo ended. But still, it has been over a month. More people should be talking about this, I think. So that's part of this. And whether you're talking about Yars Rising, whether you are on the Patreon, on the Discord, or this is your first episode of Fun and Games, thank you so much for your support. All of it helps. We couldn't do this without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hello, my name is Aaron. I'm one half of Superpod Saga, a topical variety video game podcast fueled entirely by nostalgia and unleaded gasoline. Superpod Saga, we discuss a different video game topic each and every week. We have new episodes every single Monday covering a different video game topic. More than anything, we want to entertain our listeners and make you feel like you're one of the boys, like you're hanging out at a campfire with some of your best zany caffeine-powered buddies and just talking about your favorite games and all that stuff. Stop on down to Superpod Saga. It's on every podcatcher there is. If it's not, let me know and we'll get on it. But again, Superpod Saga, stop on by.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.